Morbid Facts, Part 845. Before fame, Shania Twain was already carrying adult burdens as a child, singing in bars until 1 a.m. at the age of 8 just to help keep her family afloat. But in 1987, that fragile stability was suddenly destroyed when her mother and stepfather were killed in a violent car accident after their vehicle was struck head-on by a truck driven by a drunk driver. Shania was only 22 when she became the legal guardian of her 4 younger siblings, putting her music career on hold to raise them and keep the family together, stepping into survival mode years before the world ever knew her name. Christopher Tapp spent more than 20 years in prison for the 1996 murder of 18-year-old Angie Dodge, a crime he didn't commit. Police had coerced a false confession out of him, even though none of the DNA at the scene matched. In 2019, genetic genealogy finally identified the real killer, leading to Tapp's full exoneration and a record-breaking $11.7 million settlement he received in 2022. But less than a year after finally reclaiming his life, Tapp was found beaten and unresponsive in a Las Vegas hotel room after an altercation. The coroner ruled his death a homicide, and a former pro wrestler was later charged. This was the moment when a woman's dark past finally caught up with her after 4 decades.
How you doing, Miss Sharon? Pretty good.
Uh-oh, they're coming for you, Sharon! They don't want me. They want Reggie. What's up?
Well, we're here for you, ma'am. Definitely here for you. Ma'am, we're not.
I'm so sorry.
No, you're okay.
I'm so sorry.
Go ahead and go.
In 1983, Deborah Newton, aka Sharon, vanished with her 3-year-old daughter Michelle, telling the child's father she was taking her to Georgia and never returning. Michelle was raised under a false name, never told she was a missing child, and never told her biological father spent decades believing his little girl was gone forever. For years, Deborah was listed on the FBI's most wanted parental kidnapping list, hunted on paper while she quietly rebuilt her life. But the case eventually went cold as Michelle's name was removed from national databases and the trail went dark. Deborah remarried, lived as Sharon in Florida, and even her husband had no idea he was married to a fugitive who had erased a child's identity. Then, more than 40 years later, officers approached her as she was walking her dog in the neighborhood and arrested her, exposing the dark secret she had lived inside of for most of her adult life. She now faces a custodial interference charge in Kentucky, a crime with no statute of limitations, while the daughter she kidnapped learned that her entire life was built on a lie, and that her father had been searching and waiting for her all along. Morbid Facts, Part 846. In 2012, Harold Henthorne claimed that his wife Toni had died in a hiking accident after falling 140 feet off a cliff in Rocky Mountain National Park. On the day of their 12th wedding anniversary, Harold insisted on a strenuous hike up Deer Mountain despite Toni's bad knee and limited hiking experience. After her fall, he gave investigators multiple conflicting accounts, repeatedly changing what he said he was doing at the moment she fell over the edge. Investigators later found a map in his car with the exact location of her death marked with an X, and uncovered that his spouse before Toni had also died years earlier under mysterious circumstances. Toni's death closely resembled the 1995 death of Lynn Henthorne, who was crushed beneath a Jeep on a remote Colorado road when it supposedly slipped off a jack. Harold claimed both deaths were merely accidents, but prosecutors argued the similarities were far too extreme to be considered coincidence. In 2015, he was convicted of murdering Toni Henthorne and sentenced to life in prison. Extra Morbid Facts, Part 104. On December 11, 2002, 22-year-old Alan Menzies murdered his best friend, 21-year-old Thomas McKendrick, inside his home in West Lothian, Scotland. Menzies had become obsessed with the film Queen of the Damned, watching it more than 100 times, and later told police he believed the character Queen Akasha was visiting him and instructing him to kill for immortality. When McKendrick came over that morning, Menzies attacked him with knives and a hammer, claiming the violence was triggered after McKendrick insulted Akasha. After killing him, Menzies drank McKendrick's blood and ate part of his head, stating this was the necessary process to become a vampire. He then placed the body of his best friend in a wheelbarrow and buried it in a shallow grave, where it remained undiscovered for the next 6 weeks. In court, prosecutors revealed Menzies had a long history of serious violence starting at age 14, including multiple stabbings. He literally told the court, if you don't murder somebody, you can't become a vampire. Menzies received a life sentence with at least 18 years before parole eligibility, but in 2004, less than 2 years after the murder, he was found dead in his prison cell. This video of a man playing with a blue-ringed octopus, completely oblivious that he's handling one of the most lethal animals on the planet. The tiny octopus contains tetrodotoxin, a venom powerful enough to kill an adult human within minutes, causing total paralysis while leaving the victim fully conscious and aware of what's happening. A single bite can shut down the lungs, stopping breathing as the body becomes unable to move or cry for help. There's no antidote, and survival depends entirely on immediate artificial ventilation until the toxin wears off. Even worse, blue-ringed octopuses often bite painlessly, meaning the man wouldn't even realize he's been bitten until his muscles begin to fail. Morbid Facts, Part 853. Real estate agent Todd Kohlhepp became known as the Amazon Review Killer after investigators uncovered sarcastic product reviews he had posted that referenced his real crimes. For years, he joked about using knives, chains, and shovels while remaining unidentified. In 2016, police traced the disappearance of Kayla Brown to his rural South Carolina property, where she was found alive, chained inside a shipping container after Kohlhepp had already murdered her boyfriend. A search of the land revealed multiple buried bodies, and Kohlhepp later confessed to killing 7 people between 2003 and 2016, including 4 victims in a long cold motorcycle shop massacre. Kim Stanger is a criminal law researcher in Ohio who lives with an extremely rare neurological condition that leaves her with no sense of touch, pain, or temperature. Her peripheral nerves don't transmit any sensory signals, meaning she cannot feel injuries, burns, or pressure on her body. Doctors have described her as the only living person documented with a complete loss of somatosensation at this level. As a result, Stanger must visually monitor her body at all times to avoid unknowingly injuring herself, as even severe wounds or extreme temperatures provide no physical warning. Morbid Facts, Part 862. Austin Chumley Russell is best known as the laid-back fan favorite on Pawn Stars, but his life briefly veered off course in 2016 when police raided his Las Vegas home during a sexual assault investigation. The SA allegations were later dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the search uncovered a loaded firearm along with methamphetamine, marijuana, and Xanax. Chum was arrested and later pleaded guilty to a felony weapons charge and a misdemeanor drug charge, receiving probation, counseling, and rehab instead of prison time. He later cleaned up his life, lost 150 pounds, stayed on the show, and has spoken openly about focusing on his health and sobriety afterward. In 2010, an undercover journalist working for the dissident outlet Asia Press smuggled out rare footage from North Korea showing a severely malnourished 23-year-old homeless woman who said she survived by eating grass. Her voice was so weak that the reporter couldn't clearly record her name, and her identity has never been verified. Months later, local contacts reported she was found dead in a nearby cornfield, believed to have collapsed from starvation while desperately trying to eat raw corn. North Korea's state media never acknowledged the footage, but defectors reported heightened surveillance and crackdowns in the area afterward, with anyone suspected of leaking information facing severe punishment. Morbid Facts, Part 861. In February of 2025, 22-year-old Daniel Waterman was left comatose after a violent interstate crash in Florida, leaving him with severe head and spinal injuries. After briefly regaining consciousness months later, he told investigators the crash was intentional, alleging that his pregnant girlfriend, 24-year-old Leah Mumby, deliberately drove the car into a tree during an argument, accelerating as he tried to escape and telling him, "I don't care what happens, you'll get what you deserve." Mumby initially said she did not remember what happened before the crash. Waterby died from his injuries in October of 2025, and prosecutors later upgraded her charges to vehicular homicide. In 1962, the United States detonated a nuclear warhead in space during the Starfish Prime test, exploding it about 250 miles above Earth. The blast was far more destructive than expected, knocking out or damaging multiple satellites, creating artificial radiation belts that lingered for years, and causing electrical failures as far away as Hawaii. The test proved that nuclear explosions in space were unpredictable and capable of long-term damage to both technology and Earth's near-space environment, effectively ending any further attempts once scientists realized the harm could not be controlled. Extra Morbid Facts, Part 109. In Florida in 1999, siblings 12-year-old Curtis Jones and 13-year-old Catherine Jones were arrested after murdering their father's girlfriend inside their home. Court records show the attack involved blunt force and stabbing and was carried out while the woman was asleep. Despite their ages, prosecutors charged both children as adults, placing them into the adult criminal justice system and exposing them to potentially decades in prison. At the time, the case was widely framed as an example of extreme juvenile violence. violence. The siblings were jailed, processed through adult court, and publicly vilified. But years later, unsealed court documents revealed that the children had allegedly been subjected to repeated sexual abuse by the victim and had attempted to report it multiple times, but their claims were ignored. After those revelations, both sentences were reduced to single-digit prison terms. Following her release, Catherine Jones went on to dedicate her life to juvenile justice advocacy, speaking publicly about her case and working to reform how abused children are treated by the legal system. Extra Morbid Facts, Part 110. In 2012, a homeless man named Ronald Papa was savagely attacked beneath a Miami overpass in an assault caught on camera lasting 18 minutes. The attacker, Rudy Eugene, beat him unconscious and chewed away most of his face, including an eyeball, leaving Papa permanently disfigured and blind. Police arrived during the attack and fatally shot Eugene when he ignored commands and continued biting his victim. Papa survived after extensive surgeries but was left permanently disfigured. Despite early claims of drug-induced madness, toxicology reports failed to identify any substance that could fully explain the horrific attack. Morbid Facts, Part 856. On June 5, 1986, 24-year-old New York City model Marla Hanson was asked by her landlord Stephen Roth to meet outside a Manhattan bar to collect an $850 security deposit he owed her. As they walked away, Hanson was ambushed by two men Roth had hired. One attacker restrained her head while the other slashed her face with razor blades, carving deep wounds across her cheeks as Roth stood by and watched. The attack required more than 150 stitches, leaving her with permanent disfigurement that effectively ended her modeling career. Hanson survived after extensive reconstructive surgery, and investigators later determined that Roth had ordered the attack after she rejected his romantic advances. He and the two attackers were convicted and sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. Hanson said the trauma continued in court, where a defense attorney subjected her to a vicious and humiliating cross-examination, attacking her credibility, accusing her of manipulating men, and suggested she had falsely identified her attackers due to her being racist, an experience she described as worse than the physical attack itself. Extra Morbid Facts, Part 108. Tanya Catch was 14 when she was groomed and abducted in 1996 by Thomas Hose, a 38-year-old security guard at her Pennsylvania middle school. Struggling with family turmoil after her parents' divorce, she was lured to his home where he confined her for nearly a decade. For the first 4 years, she was locked in his upstairs bedroom, hidden from Hose's parents and son downstairs, using a bucket as a toilet. Hose subjected her to repeated sexual assaults while forcing her to document the encounters in a journal in a positive light. He brainwashed her, threatening to kill her and her family if she ever tried to escape. Around 2000, he gave her the false identity Nikki Allen and introduced her as his girlfriend, allowing limited outings with strict curfews. In 2006, while working at a local convenience store, Tanya confided in the owner Tony Sparico, who alerted authorities, leading to her rescue. Hose pleaded guilty to several charges, including involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, statutory sexual assault, and corruption of a minor, but not kidnapping due to laws of the early 2000s. He only received a 15-year sentence and was released in February of 2022. Hose remains a registered sex offender and reportedly returned to live just minutes from Tanya. She's since shared her harrowing story in her memoir, interviews, and media adaptations to raise awareness about grooming and abuse. Extra Morbid Facts, Part 112. In December of 2019, Anthony Topp murdered his wife Megan and their 3 young children along with the family dog inside their home in Celebration, Florida. Autopsies showed the victims were restrained, beaten, and suffocated, with evidence indicating the children were killed first. Topp then remained in the house for weeks as the bodies decomposed, sleeping nearby and conducting normal activities while masking the smells with air fresheners. When police entered the home a few weeks later, they found all 5 bodies in various stages of decomposition. Topp later admitted responsibility, though he gave conflicting accounts and attempted to blame his wife. In 2023, he was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and animal cruelty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Morbid Facts, Part 857. For years, rumors circulated that prostitutes who went to a pig farm outside of Vancouver never came back. That's because Canadian serial killer Robert Pickton was murdering them on his property. From the late 1980s to the early 2000s, dozens disappeared after being lured there, where they were killed, dismembered, and fed to the pigs. DNA from multiple victims was later found scattered across the farm, and in 2007, Pickton was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life, though prosecutors argued he killed at least 26 women. According to court records and police testimony, Pickton told an undercover police officer posing as a cellmate that he had killed 49 women and was upset he was caught right before making it to 50. Benjamin Guggenheim was a wealthy American industrialist traveling aboard the Titanic in 1912. As the ship sank, he refused a lifeboat, insisting that women and children go first. He reportedly changed into evening clothes with his valet and prepared to die on board the ship. Before disappearing below deck, Guggenheim is said to have asked a survivor to tell his family that he, quote, played the game straight to the end and that no woman or child was left behind because Ben Guggenheim was a coward. His body was never recovered. Morbid Facts, Part 844. Eddie Murphy's childhood was shaped by sudden violence long before he became famous. When he was about 7 years old, his biological father, Charles Edward Murphy, was shot and killed during a domestic dispute involving his girlfriend. The killing abruptly removed his father from his life, leaving Murphy and his brother to grow up without him. The loss is rarely mentioned in discussions of his personal life, and Murphy himself has rarely addressed it publicly. In 2025, 35-year-old Michael Virgil died on board a Royal Caribbean cruise after allegedly being served more than 30 alcoholic drinks in a single day, according to a wrongful death lawsuit filed by his family. Court filings state that Virgil showed clear signs of severe intoxication before experiencing a violent outburst, during which he became disoriented and aggressive. Crew members restrained him as his condition worsened, and he later collapsed. Virgil was eventually pronounced dead on board, and his body was stored in the ship's refrigerated morgue until the vessel returned to port. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner later ruled his death a homicide, citing acute alcohol intoxication and restraint-related factors, and his family is seeking accountability from the cruise line for alleged over-serving and failures in response. This was the moment when an off-duty police officer in Barcelona realized something was seriously wrong at a subway station. A young man on the platform appeared disoriented and unsteady, drifting dangerously close to the edge in a station where trains arrive every few minutes. The officer, later identified as Felisa Pozas, was off-duty but immediately recognized the risk. She walked to an emergency SOS intercom and pressed the button to alert Metro Control that someone needed help. But seconds later, the situation escalated as the man suddenly lost his balance and fell onto the tracks below. Without hesitating, Pozas ran toward him as several nearby commuters rushed in to help. Working against the clock, they grabbed him and hoisted him back onto the platform, knowing a train could enter the station at any moment. No one was seriously injured, and authorities later confirmed the man was not intoxicated. No further details about his condition have been released, but officials say the outcome could have easily been fatal if not for Pozas' awareness, her decision to act immediately, and the fact that she didn't wait for someone else to step in. Extra Morbid Facts, Part 101. In October of 2024, Micah Smith took his 3 young children, ages 2, 4, and 8, on a 9-mile hike in Utah that authorities described as extremely difficult and dangerous, especially as a major storm was rolling in. Court records say Smith failed to check the weather and continued climbing, even after sending photos of the incoming storm to his wife, who urged him to turn back. Investigators say he refused, later telling police he was comfortable hiking in the dark without lights. By the time they reached the summit around 6 p.m., hail and snow had started falling. The family began descending, but only made it about 600 feet before one child fell and struck their head. At that point, Smith decided to shelter in place overnight with the children, despite worsening weather and inadequate clothing. During the night, prosecutors say the children repeatedly said they were cold, exhausted, and wanted to go home. One child allegedly begged Smith to turn back earlier, saying she was afraid she might not survive, but he refused, calling the hike a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Court documents state Smith later claimed he performed CPR on his son overnight and instructed his daughter to continue the CPR before leaving his children behind. When search and rescue teams located Smith the next day, he was all alone and appeared completely unconcerned about his kids, telling responders he believed one of his children was already dead. A helicopter crew later found the 3 children together, severely hypothermic and inadequately clothed. All 3 children ultimately survived, though 2 were in critical condition, and one had a core body temperature of 63 degrees Fahrenheit that led to a stroke and emergency brain surgery. Smith was later charged with aggravated child abuse and child torture, with prosecutors requesting no bail, arguing he repeatedly chose to continue, despite warnings from the children, their mother, and the worsening weather. Morbid Facts, Part 847. DJ Carey, a former Irish hurling legend, was jailed after admitting he spent years faking a cancer diagnosis to scam friends and contacts out of nearly £350,000. Prosecutors revealed he sent staged photos showing what appeared to be medical tubing in his nose, later exposed as an iPhone charging cable taped to his face. He claimed the money was urgently needed for treatment, exploiting sympathy and trust while continuing the deception. The scheme collapsed when victims grew suspicious, and authorities confirmed he never even had cancer at all. Carey pleaded guilty to multiple fraud charges and was sentenced to more than 5 years in prison. A man once spent nearly 5 months locked inside Rikers Island without realizing he could have walked free at any point for just $2. Court records later showed a judge had ordered his release only a week after he was arrested for a nonviolent offense, setting an absurdly low bail, but his lawyer never told him. With no one informing him of his status, he remained trapped inside one of the most notoriously violent jail complexes in the United States, a place long plagued by assaults, gang activity, neglect, and inmate murders. By the time the mistake had been discovered, months of his life had already been lost to one of the most dangerous detention systems in the country. Morbid Facts, Part 860. This was one of the last known photos taken of rapper XXXTentacion, moments before he was fatally shot during a robbery outside a Florida motorcycle dealership in June of 2018. Investigators determined it was not a targeted hit job, but a robbery gone wrong after suspects spotted his luxury vehicle and expensive Louis Vuitton bag. Released surveillance footage showed 2 gunmen approaching his car, demanding the bag and opening fire when he resisted. The 20-year-old artist, born Jose Onfroy, was shot multiple times at close range and died shortly after at a nearby hospital. In 2023, 3 men were convicted of his first-degree murder and armed robbery. Beatrice Flamini spent 500 days completely alone inside a cave nearly 230 feet underground, cut off from sunlight, clocks, and all human contact as part of an experiment on extreme isolation. She entered the cave in November of 2021 and did not emerge until April of 2023, with no communication with the outside world during that time. Scientists monitoring her remotely had found that her circadian rhythm had completely collapsed, with severe sleep disruption, memory lapses, and slowed cognition developing over time. Flamini later described moments of mental detachment and sensory distortion, and when she finally resurfaced, she genuinely believed she'd only been underground for about 160 days, illustrating how prolonged isolation can fundamentally fracture the brain's sense of time and reality. Extra Morbid Facts, Part 113. In October of 2024 in Arizona, 9-year-old Rebecca Baptiste escaped her home by jumping out a second-story apartment window and running to a nearby gas station, where she begged strangers for help and said she was being abused by her father and his girlfriend. Police and child welfare authorities were notified, and hospital staff documented visible injuries, but officers ultimately downplayed her claims and returned her to her abusers. Over the following months, the abuse escalated until July of 2025, when Rebecca was found unresponsive along a rural highway and later died from non-accidental trauma. An autopsy revealed extreme malnourishment, extensive bruising, burns, hair loss, and other injuries consistent with prolonged torture. Her father, Richard Baptiste, and his girlfriend, Anisha Woods, were arrested and charged with murder and severe child abuse, as the case became a stark example of how a child's desperate pleas for help were ignored with fatal consequences. This was the moment when a hang gliding instructor realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. In November of 2018 in Switzerland, American tourist Chris Gursky had just taken off on a tandem hang gliding flight when he and the instructor immediately noticed that Gursky was not attached to the safety harness at all. The instructor immediately attempted an emergency stop, but strong winds instead lifted the glider higher into the air, sending them soaring hundreds of feet above the ground. With no safety line and no way to land immediately, Gursky was left dangling with nothing securing him to the aircraft. He was forced to cling to the metal frame with his hands while also desperately gripping the instructor to avoid falling. For more than 2 minutes, Gursky held on for dear life as his arms visibly shook and his grip weakened, fully aware that giving in to the pain would mean certain death. The entire ordeal was captured on video as the instructor desperately fought the wind and steered toward an emergency landing. When they finally reached the ground, Gursky collapsed in pain and was later diagnosed with a fractured wrist and torn bicep from hanging on so tightly. Authorities ruled the accident a serious safety failure, fining the instructor and suspending his license, while the footage became a chilling reminder of how one small misstep turned a fun recreational flight into a life-threatening nightmare. This was the moment when a routine day on the slope suddenly spiraled into chaos, when a chairlift at Georgia's Gadori Ski Resort malfunctioned and began racing backward down the mountain. The lift reversed at high speed, smashing chairs together at the bottom terminal and violently throwing riders to the ground, while others were forced to jump to avoid being crushed by swinging metal seats. Screams erupted as people piled at the base of the lift, with some narrowly missing being struck by flying chairs and bodies. At least 8 people were seriously injured, including tourists from several countries, with reported injuries ranging from broken limbs to head and spinal trauma. Investigators later concluded the rollback was triggered by an electrical failure, which was only worsened by operator error after emergency procedures were not properly followed. In the aftermath, the lift operator was suspended and resort managers were forced to resign. Criminal and civil investigations later followed, examining how a system designed to keep riders safe turned into a death trap within seconds. Morbid Facts, Part 858. During a low-speed car crash in Georgia, what should have been a routine airbag deployment turned into a life-altering injury for Hannah Oliver. The collision occurred at roughly 25 miles per hour, but when the airbag deployed, it shattered the designer glasses she was wearing, driving fragments into her eye. Doctors later determined the damage was irreversible, and Hannah went blind in that eye. But in the aftermath, she channeled the trauma into action, later launching a shatter-resistant sunglasses brand to prevent the same injury from happening to others. A young Arkansas couple pleaded guilty after attempting to sell their 2-month-old baby at a campground for $1,000 and a 6-pack of beer. The deal was written out in a handwritten contract and witnessed by others, one of whom alerted police. Authorities recovered the infant and charged the parents with child endangerment and attempting to accept compensation for adoption. The father was sentenced to prison time while the mother received probation, and both were permanently barred from contact with the child, who was placed in protective care. Morbid Facts, Part 855. In December of 2025, 33-year-old Mexican-Canadian influencer Denise Gongora, known online as Mary Magdalene for her extreme cosmetic procedures and adult content, was found dead after falling from a 9th-floor high-rise in Phuket, Thailand. Just a few hours before her death, she shared this troubling post suggesting deep emotional exhaustion, prompting concern from fans. In the weeks leading up to the incident, videos circulated showing her appearing heavily intoxicated and being assisted back to her hotel by police and bystanders. Thai authorities reviewed security footage, witness statements, and scene evidence before officially concluding the case was a self-inflicted death. Carolina Olsen, later nicknamed the Sleeping Beauty of Sweden, went to bed at age 14 on a small Swedish island in 1876 and effectively stayed asleep for the next 32 years. For decades, she lay unresponsive, barely speaking, rarely moving, and depending on others to feed and care for her. When she finally awakened in 1908, she reportedly believed it was the same day she had fallen asleep. Although doctors later noted brief moments of awareness during those years, Olsen experienced no sense of time passing, essentially sleeping half her life away. This was the horrifying moment a young child was nearly killed by her bus driver when she became trapped after her backpack was caught in the closing door of a Kentucky school bus as she was getting off. The driver then pulled away without noticing, dragging the child alongside the moving bus for hundreds of feet. Luckily, honking bystanders eventually caught the bus driver's attention and she was forced to come to an abrupt stop. The girl suffered serious physical injuries including nerve damage, requiring nearly a dozen surgeries and skin grafts, along with lasting psychological trauma. Court filings noted that she was a special needs student and argued that the bus route, supervision, and safety procedures in place were not appropriate for her needs. The bus driver was removed from duty and later fired, and the school district acknowledged failures in safety oversight. Years later, the child, publicly identified as Allie Rednauer, is back on her feet but continues to deal with ongoing physical and emotional effects and continued medical care. The case ultimately ended with a nearly $5 million settlement, and Allie and her family have since spoken out, pushing for mandatory school bus safety upgrades and warning that without changes, another child could be seriously injured or killed in the same way. This was the moment influencer Clavicular was live streaming from Miami when a known stream sniper jumped onto the hood of his Cybertruck, filming and taunting him while refusing to move. Viewers alleged the man had been following and harassing Clavicular in the weeks beforehand and is a known stalker in the industry. Clavicular then accelerated and ran the man over as his passengers panicked and asked if the man had just been killed, as Clavicular responded hopefully.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Is he dead?
I don't know.
Hopefully.
Clavicular, a polarizing looks-maxing influencer known for content focused on facial structure, body aesthetics, and the belief that men can change their face through disciplined posture and extreme cosmetic procedures, went in for questioning, but no criminal charges were publicly announced. Some argue Clav acted in self-defense or out of fear against a reckless stalker, while others say running him over crossed an irreversible line, turning harassment into a near-fatal event. Clavicular has since been banned from Kick and described the situation as unfortunate without providing any further information.